Maria Santos had spent the last 15 years of her life cleaning office buildings in downtown Manhattan. Every evening at 6 o'clock, she would put on her plain gray uniform, pull her dark hair back into a simple bun, and make her way to the towering glass skyscrapers that seemed to touch the clouds. While most people were heading home after a long day of work, Maria's shift was just beginning. She moved quietly through the polished hallways with her cleaning cart, wiping down desks, emptying trash bins, and mopping floors until they gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The work was honest but exhausting, and it barely paid enough to cover rent for the small studio apartment she shared with her teenage daughter in Queens. Maria had come to America from the Philippines 20 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of dreams. She had hoped to become a music teacher, to share her love of piano with students who might discover the same joy she had felt as a child. Back in Manila, she had been considered something of a prodigy. Her father, a carpenter with calloused hands and a gentle spirit, had saved for years to buy her a second-hand upright piano when she was 7 years old. From the moment her small fingers touched those ivory keys, something inside her had awakened. She practiced for hours every day, losing herself in the music of Chopin, Beethoven, and Rachmaninoff. Her teachers told her parents that she had a rare gift, that she could have a future performing on stages around the world. But life had other plans for Maria. Her father passed away suddenly when she was 18, leaving her mother struggling to support 3 younger siblings. Maria set aside her dreams of music school and took whatever work she could find to help her family survive. When she met Robert, an American businessman working in Manila, she thought perhaps her luck was finally changing. They married quickly, and he promised her a better life in New York. She arrived in America filled with hope, but Robert turned out to be very different from the charming man who had courted her. The marriage fell apart within 2 years, leaving Maria alone in a foreign country with a baby daughter and no money to her name. The years that followed were a blur of struggle and sacrifice. Maria worked multiple jobs to provide for her daughter, Alina. She cleaned houses during the day and offices at night. She took English classes whenever she could, determined to improve her language skills and create better opportunities. But the dream of playing piano professionally seemed to slip further and further away with each passing year. The instruments she encountered were always behind locked doors in wealthy homes or in music stores where she couldn't afford even the cheapest keyboard. She taught herself to push those longings down, to focus on the practical matters of survival. Alina needed food, clothes, school supplies, and a mother who could be strong even when she felt broken inside. On this particular evening in late November, Maria arrived at the Grandview Tower for her regular cleaning shift. The building housed several corporate offices, a few luxury apartments, and a grand event space on the 20th floor. As Maria pushed her cart toward the service elevator, she noticed unusual activity in the lobby. Well-dressed men and women in expensive suits and glittering jewelry were streaming toward the main elevators, their laughter and chatter echoing off the marble walls. A massive banner near the elevator bank announced a charity gala for the Henderson Foundation, hosted by tech billionaire Marcus Henderson himself. Maria had seen his face on magazine covers in the break room and had heard other cleaning staff talk about him. He was young, brilliant, and worth more money than Maria could even imagine. His company had revolutionized cloud computing and made him one of the richest people in the world before he turned 40. Maria paid little attention to the glamorous crowd. Their world and hers existed in the same building, but might as well have been on different planets. She took the service elevator to the 20th floor, where she was supposed to clean the offices of a law firm that occupied the West Wing. But when the elevator doors opened, she was surprised to find that the hallway had been blocked off. A security guard, young and looking somewhat flustered, stopped her immediately. He explained that the entire 20th floor had been reserved for the Henderson Foundation Gala and that all cleaning services had been rescheduled for the following day. Maria felt a flash of frustration since no one had informed her about the schedule change, which meant she would lose several hours of pay. But she simply nodded politely and turned back toward the elevator. As she waited for the elevator to return, Maria heard something that made her freeze in place. Drifting through the closed doors of the event space, she could hear music. Not the recorded background music she usually heard in lobbies and waiting rooms, but the unmistakable sound of a real piano being played live. The melody was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, one of the first complex pieces she had learned as a teenager. But the performance was clumsy and halting, filled with wrong notes and awkward pauses. Whoever was playing clearly had some basic training, but lacked the skill to do justice to such a beautiful composition. Maria felt something stir inside her chest, a familiar ache she had learned to ignore. Her fingers twitched involuntarily at her sides, remembering the patterns and movements the piece required. The security guard had stepped away to speak into his radio, and Maria found herself drawn toward the sound of the struggling piano performance. She knew she shouldn't linger, that she should simply go home and accept the lost wages, but something pulled her forward. Through a narrow gap in the partially open door, she could see into the magnificent ballroom. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting dancing light across hundreds of guests in formal attire. Tables draped in white linen surrounded a central area where people mingled with champagne glasses in their hands. And there, on a small stage at the far end of the room, sat a gleaming black grand piano. A young woman in an elegant red dress was seated at the piano, her blonde hair swept up in an elaborate style. She was clearly trying her best, but her performance of the Moonlight Sonata continued to stumble through wrong chords and missed rhythms. Some guests were politely ignoring the performance, engaged in their own conversations, while others watched with thinly veiled winces at each mistake. Maria could see a tall man in an impeccably tailored tuxedo standing near the stage, his arms crossed and a tight smile on his face. Even from a distance, she recognized Marcus Henderson from the photographs she had seen. His expression suggested he was trying to maintain composure despite the uncomfortable performance. The young woman at the piano finally gave up midway through the piece, her hands dropping to her lap in visible frustration. She stood up quickly, her face flushed with embarrassment, and hurried off the stage to scattered, sympathetic applause. Marcus Henderson stepped forward with a microphone, making a gracious comment about appreciating her bravery and reminding everyone that the evening was about raising money for music education programs in underserved communities. The irony was not lost on Maria, who stood in the shadows watching people who probably spent more on their jewelry than she earned in a year, gathered to help children who wanted to learn music. Marcus continued speaking, explaining that the original pianist scheduled to perform had fallen ill at the last minute, and he asked if anyone in the audience played piano and might be willing to share a piece with the guests. An awkward silence filled the room. A few people laughed nervously, and someone made a joke about their childhood piano lessons being too far in the past. Marcus maintained his charming smile, but Maria could see a hint of desperation in his eyes. This gala was clearly important to him, and the evening's entertainment had fallen apart. Maria felt her heart pounding in her chest. Every rational part of her mind screamed at her to walk away, to return to the elevator and go home where she belonged. She was a cleaning woman in a gray uniform. She had no business in that glittering ballroom among people who lived in a completely different reality. What would they think if she, with her work-worn hands and simple clothes, dared to approach that beautiful piano? They would probably laugh at her presumption or worse, have security escort her out with humiliation. Alina's voice echoed in her memory from a conversation they'd had just last week when her daughter asked why she never played piano anymore. Maria had said that some dreams have to be set aside for practical reasons, that life doesn't always give you what you want. But standing there listening to the silence in that ballroom, Maria felt something shift inside her. She thought about all the years she had spent invisible, moving through spaces where wealthy people worked and played, cleaning up after them without ever being truly seen as a person with her own story and talents. She thought about the little girl in Manila who had once played piano with such joy and promise, and how that girl had slowly disappeared under the weight of responsibility and disappointment. She thought about Alina, who was now 15 and starting to make choices about her own future. What kind of example was she setting by always playing it safe, by always accepting invisibility? Before she could talk herself out of it, Maria stepped through the doorway and into the ballroom. Her worn sneakers made soft sounds on the polished floor as she walked past elegant guests who turned to stare at her cleaning uniform with confusion and surprise. Conversations halted mid-sentence as people registered this unexpected intrusion. Maria kept her eyes focused on Marcus Henderson, willing herself to keep moving forward even as her legs trembled beneath her. The distance to the stage felt like miles, and she was acutely aware of every whisper, every raised eyebrow, every look of bewilderment directed her way. When she reached the area where Marcus stood, he looked down at her with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Up close, she could see that his eyes were kind despite his obvious wealth and power. Maria's voice came out smaller than she intended when she spoke, her accent more pronounced due to her nervousness. She told him that she could play piano if he still needed someone. For a moment, Marcus simply stared at her, clearly trying to process this unexpected offer from a cleaning woman who had somehow wandered into his exclusive event. The silence stretched out and Maria felt her courage beginning to fail. She started to apologize and turn away, certain she had made a terrible mistake. But then Marcus surprised her by smiling, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. He asked her name, and when she told him, he extended his hand for a handshake as if she were one of his wealthy guests rather than someone who cleaned offices for minimum wage. He asked if she was certain she wanted to play for this crowd, giving her an out if she wanted to retreat. Maria thought about all the years of silence, all the times she had hidden her gifts and her dreams. She looked at that magnificent grand piano sitting on the stage, probably worth more than everything she owned combined, and she felt a fierce longing to touch those keys just one more time. She nodded and told Marcus she was sure. Marcus Henderson guided Maria toward the stage with a gentle hand on her shoulder, his voice carrying through the microphone as he addressed his confused guests. He explained that they had a volunteer willing to play for them this evening, and he asked everyone to please welcome Maria Santos. The applause that followed was polite but uncertain, and Maria could feel hundreds of eyes following her as she climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Her hands were shaking as she approached the piano bench, and for a terrifying moment, she wondered if her fingers would even remember how to find the right keys after so many years away from a real instrument. She sat down slowly, adjusting the bench to the right height, a motion that came back to her body like muscle memory from a previous life. The piano was absolutely beautiful up close, its black surface so perfectly polished that she could see her own reflection staring back at her. It was a Steinway concert grand, the kind of instrument she had only dreamed of playing during her student years in Manila. She placed her hands gently on the keys, and the cool, smooth surface beneath her fingertips sent a shock of recognition through her entire body. It had been so long, so terribly long since she had felt this connection. Maria closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to block out the crowd of wealthy strangers watching her with skepticism and curiosity. She thought about her father and how he used to sit beside her during practice sessions in their small house in Manila, his face glowing with pride every time she mastered a difficult passage. She thought about Alina, probably at home right now doing homework at their tiny kitchen table, unaware that her mother was about to do something completely unexpected. And she thought about the young girl she had once been, the one who believed that music could carry her anywhere, that talent and passion could overcome any obstacle. Her fingers found their starting position, and she began to play Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy. She had always loved this piece, with its gentle flowing melody that seemed to capture moonlight turning into music. The first notes rang out across the ballroom, clear and pure and absolutely perfect. Maria felt something unlock inside her chest, years of suppressed emotion and artistic longing pouring out through her fingertips. The piano responded to her touch like a living thing, each note blooming exactly as she intended. Her hands moved across the keys with a grace and confidence that belied her humble appearance and the years she had spent away from music. The change in the room was immediate and palpable. Conversations stopped mid-word as guests turned fully toward the stage, drawn by the unexpected beauty of what they were hearing. People who had been checking their phones put them away. Waiters carrying trays of champagne slowed their movements, not wanting to create any sound that might disturb the performance. The quality of Maria's playing was so far beyond what anyone had expected that it created a kind of shock, a collective realization that they had completely misjudged this woman in the cleaning uniform. Marcus Henderson stood motionless near the stage, his expression transformed from polite interest to genuine amazement. He had hosted countless charity events and heard many talented musicians perform, but there was something different about what he was witnessing now. This wasn't just technical skill, though Maria's technique was flawless. There was a depth of feeling in her interpretation, a kind of emotional honesty that came from someone who had lived a real life filled with struggle and sacrifice. Every note seemed to carry weight, to mean something beyond just the music itself. As Maria moved through the piece, her initial nervousness melted away completely. She was no longer aware of the expensive dresses and tuxedos surrounding her, no longer conscious of her own worn uniform or her rough hands that spent every night scrubbing and cleaning. She was simply inside the music, experiencing the pure joy that had been denied to her for so many years. Her eyes remained closed, but her face showed everything she was feeling. There was pain there and longing and regret for lost time, but there was also transcendent happiness in this moment of being fully herself again. The Clair de Lune built toward its gentle climax, the melody swelling with bittersweet beauty before settling back into quieter passages. Maria's hands moved with absolute certainty across the keys, never hesitating, never fumbling. She had played this piece hundreds of times as a young woman, and her fingers remembered every nuance, every subtle shift in dynamics and tempo. The ballroom had become completely silent except for the piano, as if the entire room was holding its breath, afraid that any movement might break the spell of what they were experiencing. When Maria played the final delicate notes and lifted her hands from the keys, there was a moment of absolute stillness. She opened her eyes and blinked, suddenly remembering where she was and what she had just done. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, and Maria felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. Had she made a fool of herself? Had she overstepped so badly that these people were offended by her presumption? She started to stand up, ready to apologize and flee from the stage as quickly as possible. But then the applause started. It began with Marcus Henderson, who was clapping with genuine enthusiasm, his professional composure completely abandoned in favor of authentic appreciation. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. People weren't just clapping politely as they had for the earlier performer. They were standing, rising from their seats in a genuine standing ovation for this cleaning woman who had just revealed herself to be an extraordinary musician. Some people had tears in their eyes, moved by the unexpected beauty and emotional depth of what they had just heard. Maria stood on the stage in a daze, completely overwhelmed by the reaction washing over her. The applause continued, growing louder rather than fading away. She saw well-dressed women dabbing at their eyes with cocktail napkins and distinguished-looking men nodding with genuine appreciation. This wasn't the patronizing acknowledgement she had feared, but something real and deeply felt. These people, who had probably attended hundreds of concerts and performances in the finest venues around the world, recognized that they had just witnessed something special. Marcus Henderson bounded onto the stage with an energy that seemed unusual for a billionaire CEO at his own formal event. He took Maria's hand and raised it in the air like she was a champion, leading another round of applause. When the noise finally began to die down, he kept hold of her hand and turned to address his guests through the microphone. His voice carried a note of emotion that hadn't been there in his earlier polished remarks. He told the crowd that this was exactly why the Henderson Foundation existed, to ensure that talent like Maria's didn't go undiscovered or unsupported simply because of economic circumstances. He turned to Maria and asked if she would be willing to share her story with everyone. Maria hesitated, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable again now that the protective cocoon of the music had faded. But something in Marcus's genuine interest and kind eyes made her feel safe enough to speak. In halting English, still self-conscious about her accent, she began to tell the assembled guests about her childhood in Manila, about her father who had sacrificed to buy her a piano, and about the dreams she had once held of becoming a professional musician. As she spoke, Maria could see the audience's expressions shifting from mere appreciation of her musical talent to something deeper and more complex. These were people who lived lives of tremendous privilege, and many of them had probably never considered what it meant to have genuine talent but no opportunity to develop it. She told them about coming to America with hopes that had slowly been crushed under the weight of economic reality, about the years of cleaning offices while walking past locked music rooms and instruments she could never afford to touch. Her voice cracked slightly when she mentioned her daughter Alina and how she had always told her that some dreams have to be set aside for practical reasons. Marcus listened intently, and when Maria finished speaking, he asked her how long it had been since she had played a real piano. When she admitted it had been nearly 15 years, a murmur of astonishment rippled through the crowd. The fact that she could perform with such skill and emotion after such a long separation from her instrument made what they had just witnessed even more remarkable. Marcus shook his head in what appeared to be genuine disbelief mixed with admiration. He told Maria that what she had just shared with them was worth more than any professionally contracted performance could have been. Then Marcus did something that surprised everyone in the room, including Maria herself. He announced that the Henderson Foundation was establishing a new scholarship program right there on the spot, and Maria Santos would be its first recipient. He explained that the foundation would pay for her to attend any music program she chose, whether that meant formal conservatory training or private lessons with master teachers. Furthermore, he would personally ensure she had access to practice facilities and instruments, and he wanted to connect her with opportunities to perform professionally if that was what she wanted to pursue. The crowd erupted in applause again, and Maria felt her knees go weak. She had walked into this ballroom just hoping not to embarrass herself, and now a billionaire was offering to fund her return to music. It felt surreal, like something that happened in movies rather than in real life to cleaning women from Queens. Tears began streaming down her face, and she didn't even try to wipe them away. She tried to thank Marcus, but her voice failed her completely. He seemed to understand, simply giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze and telling her they would work out all the details later. But Marcus wasn't finished yet. He turned back to his guests and issued a challenge that would change the trajectory of the entire evening. He announced that he would personally match every donation made tonight dollar for dollar, and he asked his wealthy friends and colleagues to dig deep in honor of what they had just witnessed. He spoke passionately about how much untapped talent existed in the world among people who simply lacked access and opportunity. He pointed out that Maria had been working in this very building for years, walking past their offices every night, completely invisible to them despite possessing extraordinary gifts. How many other people like her existed, he asked, their potential locked away because society had decided their economic status defined their worth. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People began raising their hands to pledge donations, calling out numbers that made Maria's head spin. $10,000, $25,000, $50,000. One elderly woman in spectacular diamonds announced she was pledging $200,000, her voice shaking with emotion as she explained that she had been a pianist herself before arthritis claimed her ability to play. Within minutes, Marcus's assistant was frantically making notes as pledges totaled well over $2 million, all inspired by Maria's unexpected performance and the story of dreams deferred but not destroyed. Maria watched all of this happening and felt completely disconnected from reality. Just 2 hours ago, she had been preparing for another ordinary night of cleaning offices and emptying trash bins. Now she stood on a stage in a ballroom full of millionaires and billionaires who were pledging enormous sums of money because of her music. She thought about how close she had come to simply leaving when the security guard told her the floor was closed. If she had made that choice, if she had let fear and practicality win as they had for so many years, none of this would be happening. As the pledges continued and the total kept climbing, Maria noticed something that touched her even more deeply than the money being promised. Throughout the ballroom, people were looking at her differently now. Not with the dismissive glances that invisible service workers usually received, but with genuine respect and recognition. She was no longer just a cleaning woman to them. She was Maria Santos, a talented pianist with a powerful story, a real person with depth and value beyond her economic function. That shift in perception, that moment of being truly seen, meant almost as much as the scholarship Marcus had offered. The gala continued late into the night, but it had transformed into something completely different from the formal fundraiser Marcus Henderson had originally planned. Maria found herself surrounded by guests who wanted to speak with her, to hear more about her story, and to express how much her performance had moved them. A famous violinist who had performed at Carnegie Hall told Maria that her interpretation of Clair de Lune was one of the most emotionally honest renditions she had ever heard. A music professor from Juilliard pressed his business card into her hand and insisted she contact him about auditing classes. A wealthy gallery owner who collected rare instruments told her about a community music center in Brooklyn that needed volunteer teachers and would provide access to practice pianos. Marcus stayed close to Maria throughout the evening, seeming to genuinely enjoy watching her interact with his guests. He protected her from becoming overwhelmed, gently steering away people who were getting too pushy with their questions or advice. During a quiet moment, he asked Maria about her daughter and what Alina thought of her mother's musical talent. Maria admitted that Alina knew her mother had played piano in the Philippines, but had never actually heard her perform anything more complex than chopsticks on a toy keyboard they had bought at a thrift store years ago. The sadness in her voice when she said this seemed to strike Marcus deeply. He pulled out his phone and asked for Alina's number, suggesting that Maria call her daughter right now to share what had just happened. Maria protested that it was late and Alina would be worried if she called unexpectedly, but Marcus insisted with a warm smile. When Alina answered, clearly concerned about why her mother was calling during work hours, Maria's voice broke as she tried to explain the incredible evening she had just experienced. She could hear the confusion and disbelief in Alina's responses, her daughter struggling to understand how her mother had gone from cleaning offices to performing at a billionaire's gala. Marcus gently took the phone from Maria and introduced himself to Alina. In a kind voice that showed no trace of condescension, he told the teenager that her mother was extraordinarily talented and that he wanted to help ensure she could pursue music seriously. He mentioned the scholarship and then added something he hadn't told Maria yet. He was arranging for a piano to be delivered to their apartment within the week, a professional quality upright that would allow Maria to practice at home. Maria heard Alina's shocked gasp through the phone, and tears streamed down her face once again as the reality of how much her life was about to change finally began to sink in. After the call ended, Maria tried to express her gratitude to Marcus, but he waved away her thanks with genuine humility. He told her that he had been born into privilege and had been given every advantage in life, including the best music teachers money could buy when he briefly studied piano as a child. He had no special talent for it and had quit after a few years, treating those expensive lessons as disposable because he could always pursue something else. Seeing Maria, who had real talent but had been denied opportunities for 15 years, reminded him why his foundation's work mattered so much. She was giving him a gift, he insisted, by allowing him to help restore something precious that had been taken from her by circumstance. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, many of them stopped to speak with Maria one final time. A venture capitalist who had pledged $100,000 told her he had been moved to tears by her performance, something he couldn't remember happening in years of attending cultural events. A retired opera singer hugged Maria tightly and whispered that she had the soul of a true artist, which couldn't be taught or bought. Even the young woman who had struggled through the Moonlight Sonata earlier approached Maria with grace and kindness, telling her that watching someone play with such passion had reignited her own desire to improve rather than giving up as she had been considering. Finally, around midnight, the ballroom began to empty. Maria realized with a start that she had completely abandoned her cleaning cart hours ago and had no idea where it had ended up. A different security guard, not the one who had turned her away earlier, approached with her cart and her jacket. He told her with a knowing smile that he had heard what happened and wanted her to know that he played guitar on weekends, dreaming of making it his full-time work someday. Maria's story had given him hope, he said, that maybe dreams deferred weren't the same as dreams destroyed. Marcus walked Maria to the elevator, insisting that his driver would take her home to Queens rather than having her navigate the late-night subway in her emotional state. Before they parted, he told her that his assistant would be in touch within a few days to begin arranging everything they had discussed. He also mentioned that he wanted to organize a proper concert where Maria could perform for a larger audience, with all proceeds going to the Foundation's music education programs. The idea terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. As Maria rode down in the elevator, no longer in the service elevator but in the main one used by guests, she caught sight of her reflection in the polished metal doors. She still wore her gray cleaning uniform, and her hair was still pulled back in its practical bun, but something in her face had changed. There was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there in years, a sense of possibility that she had almost forgotten existed. She thought about how a single decision, one moment of courage to step through that doorway and offer to play, had altered the entire trajectory of her future. The limousine ride home through the nighttime streets of New York felt dreamlike. Maria watched the city pass by through tinted windows, thinking about all the times she had traveled these same routes on crowded buses and subway cars, invisible among millions of other struggling people just trying to survive. Tomorrow she would still be that person in many ways, still facing the same small apartment and the same financial challenges. But she would also be something new, someone who had been seen and recognized and valued for her gifts rather than just her labor. When Maria finally arrived home well after midnight, she found Alina still awake, sitting on their threadbare couch with her homework abandoned on the coffee table. Her daughter jumped up the moment Maria walked through the door, her face showing a mixture of excitement, confusion, and concern. Alina demanded to know if everything Marcus Henderson had told her on the phone was really true, or if this was some kind of scam or misunderstanding. Maria sat down and told her daughter the entire story from beginning to end, watching Alina's expressions shift from skepticism to wonder to tears. Alina confessed that she had always felt sad knowing her mother had given up music, even though she understood why it had been necessary. She had sometimes heard Maria humming melodies while cooking or cleaning, always stopping abruptly as if catching herself doing something she shouldn't. Alina had found a few old photographs from Manila that showed young Maria at piano recitals, wearing a white dress and holding bouquets of flowers, looking radiant and confident in a way Alina had never seen in person. She had always wondered what happened to that version of her mother, where that joy and confidence had gone. The following days passed in a blur of surreal experiences. Marcus Henderson's assistant, an efficient young woman named Jennifer, contacted Maria and helped her navigate paperwork for the scholarship program. They discussed various music schools and private teachers, trying to find the right fit for someone in Maria's unique situation. Jennifer explained that Marcus wanted Maria to have maximum flexibility, to be able to pursue music in whatever way made sense for her life rather than forcing her into a traditional conservatory track that might not work for a single mother with responsibilities. True to his word, Marcus arranged for a beautiful upright piano to be delivered to Maria's apartment. The delivery required some creative maneuvering to get it up the narrow stairwell and through the small doorway, but eventually the instrument stood against the wall of their living room, transforming the modest space into something that felt almost magical. When Maria first sat down to play it in her own home, with Alina listening intently from the couch, she broke down crying before she could finish even a simple scale. 15 years of longing and loss poured out of her, but this time the tears were mixed with profound gratitude and hope. News of what had happened at the Henderson Foundation Gala began to spread beyond that exclusive circle. A journalist who had been among the guests wrote a feature story about Maria for a major newspaper, and the piece went viral online. Suddenly, Maria found herself receiving messages from people around the world who had been moved by her story. Other immigrants wrote to share their own experiences of dreams deferred. Musicians who had given up their art for economic reasons told her she had inspired them to try again. Teachers at struggling schools asked if she would be willing to speak to their students about perseverance and hidden talent. The attention was overwhelming and sometimes uncomfortable for someone who had spent years trying to be invisible. But it also opened doors Maria had never imagined. She was invited to perform at several benefit concerts, each one helping raise money for music education programs while allowing her to develop her skills and confidence as a performer. A recording studio offered her free time to make a demo album. Music schools began reaching out with scholarship offers, eager to have her story associated with their institutions. Through it all, Marcus Henderson remained a steady presence, checking in regularly to ensure Maria wasn't being exploited or overwhelmed. He seemed to take genuine pleasure in watching her rediscovery of music, telling her once that helping her had reminded him why he had made his fortune in the first place. Money, he said, was just a tool, and the real measure of success was what you built with that tool. Watching Maria reclaim her identity as a musician and seeing the ripple effects of her story inspiring others felt more meaningful than any business deal he had ever closed. 6 months after that transformative night, Maria gave her first major solo recital at a prestigious concert hall in Manhattan. She performed a challenging program that included the Clair de Lune that had started everything, along with pieces by Chopin, Rachmaninoff, and contemporary Filipino composers. Elena sat in the front row, wearing a new dress that Maria had been able to buy her with money from her performances. Marcus Henderson was there as well, along with many of the guests from the original gala who had become genuine supporters of Maria's musical journey. As Maria walked onto the stage that night, wearing an elegant black gown instead of a cleaning uniform, she felt the weight of how far she had traveled. Not just the physical distance from Manila to New York, or even the metaphorical distance from poverty to opportunity, but the internal distance from someone who had buried her dreams to someone who was living them again. She thought about her father and wished desperately that he could see this moment, though somehow she felt he knew. The performance was not perfect. Maria's technique still showed signs of the 15-year gap in her training, and some passages didn't flow quite as smoothly as they might have if she had never stopped playing. But what her playing lacked in polish it more than made up for in emotional authenticity and hard-won wisdom. Critics who reviewed the concert noted that her interpretations carried a depth of feeling that often came only from artists who had lived through genuine struggle and loss. After the final notes faded and the applause washed over her, Maria looked out at the audience and saw not just the wealthy benefactors and music lovers who had supported her journey, but something larger. She saw possibility. She saw proof that talent and passion could survive years of dormancy and bloom again when given the chance. She saw evidence that a single moment of courage could change everything, that stepping through a doorway you weren't supposed to enter could lead to transformation beyond anything you imagined. Maria had started that November evening as an invisible cleaning woman, someone society barely noticed or valued. She ended it as herself, fully seen and recognized not despite her humble circumstances, but as someone whose worth had always existed independent of her economic status. The piano had been there inside her all along, waiting patiently through years of silence for the chance to sing again. And when that chance finally came, when she found the courage to claim it, the music poured out with a power that reminded everyone listening that extraordinary gifts can hide in the most unexpected places, behind the most ordinary faces, in the hands that clean our offices, and in the hearts that refuse to stop dreaming even when dreams seem impossible.